Guardians of the Galaxy surprised many this year, myself included, for capturing the essence of its characters, for taking the humour, the eclectic worlds and creatures of the comics, the films, and projecting it back out in video game form. A handful of bugs crept in at the game's launch, and plenty of performance frustrations, but still, at its core, Guardians of the Galaxy ended up as one of the more compelling story-driven games of 2021. Just ahead of Christmas then, I'm glad to say developer Eidos Montreal has fine-tuned its work. New features are added, alongside bug fixes on the latest patch 1.05. Among them is a long-promised ray tracing mode on console, which the team restated again and again on Twitter was still coming. Specifically, we're talking about ray-traced reflections, now available on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. So, here's some lovely shots of those reflections in their fully ray-traced glory. Ray-traced reflections. The effect, where it appears anyway, looks incredible. The polished metal material across Star-Lord's bedroom mirrors back all the details on his counter, small details that bounce against the nearby mirror as well. Then there's the puddles across later planet Seknarf 9, reflecting all mountains, the skies above, not typically rendered with a screen space technique. Ray tracing is a good fit for Guardians, a good fit for the type of environments we see in its universe, and only cements the game as one of the very best showcases for current-gen systems. There are so many questions to go with it though, but let's start with the obvious. Just how dramatic is the upgrade with ray tracing enabled? Is it a match for PC's maximum ray tracing feature set at ultra settings? And inevitably we must ask, what cost does ray tracing come at on PlayStation 5 and Series X in frame rate and settings? Elsewhere, what about the performance mode on these consoles, and has this patch 1.05 tightened up the sub 60 FPS gameplay we saw at launch? And lastly, let's not forget Series S. Series S sadly goes without a ray tracing mode, but it does get a new 60 FPS unlocked toggle in the new patch. So, how does Series S fare when targeting the full 60? Let's find out. Let's start with some good news, the big positive. The new ray tracing mode on PlayStation 5 and Series X joins the two existing modes in the graphics menu. It's an optional extra that makes its own unique trade-offs. We still have the native 4K resolution quality mode for visual purists, my preferred pick honestly between the original two, offering high settings, a 3840x2160 resolution, though all of it fixed at 30 frames per second. We also still have a performance mode running at 1080p with lower grade ambient shadows in order to hit 60 FPS. The new ray tracing mode takes a different approach to both though. The resolution for this ray tracing mode, a dynamic 4K, maxing out at 3840x2160 in less taxing scenes, but invoking DRS to drop it to 2880x1620 in battle at lowest. Both PS5 and Series X cap at 30 frames per second in this mode, and run the gamut from 1620p up to a full 4K. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Not every scene will extensively use ray tracing, I'll say that right now, and where it does, DRS gives it some flexibility to adjust GPU load and keep 30 FPS locked. Let's see those reflections in action again. Using PS5 as an example, let's compare the new ray tracing mode to its 4K quality mode, which uses a less accurate screen space method. Across the Milano, the difference sticks out pretty vividly in some spots. The metallic counter in Star-Lord's room, the cupboards, the floor of the ship, even the dark orb-like exit, all these points now reflect, even distort, nearby surroundings in a materially correct way. In some cases, the reflection is clearer to see, in others more diffuse. Now, regardless of mode, you may have noticed, it appears the mirror in Star-Lord's room uses a different technique to ray tracing, and that method stays in place regardless of which mode you choose, quality, performance, or ray tracing. The table counter though, the floors, that's all ray traced, to give a more perspective correct rendering of reflections. In fairness, the SSR technique in quality mode still holds up reasonably well. It's always been a respectable workaround. The crucial difference? Well, ray tracing ensures that even if an object, or a mountain, or especially the sky, are outside the player's camera view, it's still factored into the reflection. Take this example on Seknarf 9, a planet with lots of icy elements and puddles across the floor. See how on quality mode, the screen space method loses detail as we move the camera up and down. Switching to ray tracing mode though, there's no issue. No reflections fading in and out towards the edges of the screen. It all just stays put. Everything is drawn into the reflection from the get-go, including the skies. Cube mapping is still used as a kind of fallback at points, but where ray tracing takes effect, it does transform a scene, adding a detailed mirror image of these beautiful worlds all across the ground. In terms of settings, the ray tracing mode on PS5 and Series X runs at 30 FPS, again much like the quality mode here. The trade-off is in losing a consistent lock at a native 4K, with drops to 1620p being possible as well. But honestly, with temporal anti-aliasing in place, it's hard to spot the difference in visual clarity. In effect, the new RT mode almost works as a replacement for the quality mode, one that adds ray tracing support with these drawbacks in resolution. Foliage quality draws in near identically in this opening scene, while LODs on the first planet are similar too. That said, ambient occlusion quality does take a hit. Notice how shade fades in and out with each camera cut during this cutscene, across Rocket's fur especially. It sticks out and matches the lower quality preset used in the performance mode. Still, this really is the worst of the trade-offs to get ray tracing enabled on console. Regardless of console, PS5 or Series X, ray traced reflections are well optimized. Eidos Montreal uses each machine in the exact same way, both using matching settings and even resolution scale in a similar way in cutscenes. Between the two there's parity, but perhaps the more interesting comparison is against PC at max settings, 4K resolution, with ray tracing bumped up to Ultra. Here it is running on a Titan RTX GPU, left to run at 30 FPS for stability because frankly my PC couldn't quite handle 60. Now if we look at the PC version settings menu, there are 3 modes on show: high, very high and ultra. There's also a toggle for ray tracing on transparencies below it, but more on this later. In comparing all 3 ray tracing quality presets, there's only subtle leaps in quality between them, small gradients of improvement. Jumping up from high to very high, for example, gives the bigger leap in near-field detail. The cupboard on the right appears slightly sharper, you might notice. Ultra mode on the lower rung here then fills in a few extra details. The small gaps between reflective surfaces are filled out, hinting at extra bounces between light points, but all 3 are good-looking implementations. Where do PS5 and Series X fit in then? Well, comparing PS5 to a PC running at Ultra, we're getting a match for its high-quality ray trace setting. Again, the differences are pretty marginal, but PS5 settles for less clear definition of reflected elements nearby across metallic surfaces. Also, yes, the transparent ray trace reflection mode is apparently disabled on console as well. Notice how the underside of the Milano cockpit bounces detail back on PC with this mode selected. It's a rare use of the effect really, I've only seen it in this one spot, but yes, ray tracing is enabled across the glass while still letting you see through to the stars. On PS5 in this case, we're left with a kind of baked in solution to simulate the effect instead. So, the difference next to PC maxed out is clear. PS5 and Series X stick to the high quality ray tracing mode, the lowest available on PC, and there's no sign of the transparent ray trace reflection mode. But still, the results are pretty impressive, if mostly for avoiding the pitfalls of SSR. Now, ray tracing for all its benefits is sadly missing on Series S. The new patch does add something new in its place, nothing quite as fancy though, a frame rate toggle letting you unlock a full 60 FPS. To be clear, we had a fixed 30 FPS before the patch, running at a native 1080p, but there was a lingering sense Series S could do more, and well, here's proof of what happens without that 30 FPS cap. Perhaps there's a reason this isn't called performance mode, as it is on PS5 and Series X, because frankly, there's no change from the native 1920x1080 target resolution. It continues to run with the lower foliage density setting too, and the same ambient occlusion setting I saw in my first analysis. So it's as literal as it sounds, a frame rate toggle with no other obvious tweaks. There are no extra optimizations, at least as far as I can see, to help it actually run at 60 FPS as we have on PS5 and Series X. The result in frame rate testing, as you can see, isn't rock solid, but should be good enough for those with VRR enabled displays. Series S uncapped does hit 60 FPS at times, around the Milano interior missions, but for combat, well, it rarely holds 60 FPS consistently during lots of action, and especially cutscenes. Ultimately, most of play instead sits between 40 to 60 FPS, with occasional drops under that. My preference would be to stick with the 30 FPS cap, unless you have that VRR display, but on balance it's good to have, isn't it? It's great to at least be given the option, no harm done, and we can play as we did before the patch if we'd like. Series S is a solid entry-level way to enjoy the game on console this way, but clearly there's a lot missing next to the high-end machines. Speaking on performance, there's a few other points to check here. Frame rates in that ray tracing mode on PS5 is, well, unremarkable, in that it accomplishes a practically lock 30 all the way. No complaints, it's well optimized, and the DRS helps give it wiggle room. The only blemish to this, I've noticed anyway, is in using Star-Lord's scan view. Switching to and from this viewpoint drops PS5 very briefly into the high 20s, barely a blip, and it's otherwise a really stable ray-traced experience. So it goes for my time on Series X. This game is delivered at a similarly smooth 30 FPS cap as the quality mode. In fact, in choosing between the two modes, I'd be more tempted to use ray tracing. If you're okay with the 30 FPS experience, this has more benefits than cutbacks, and I'm glad to say both PS5 and Series X hand in a solid performance on top. The only disappointment I'd say is that if we switch to the performance mode, on PS5 in this case, it's clear there's still lingering frame rate issues in holding 60 FPS. I see the opening shot of the garden still drops here, as do intensive battles. Most of general adventuring holds at 60 FPS, but if you're after a watertight lock in battles, patch 1.05 still doesn't quite deliver. Looking at Guardians of the Galaxy as a complete, fully patched package, ray tracing is a great extra. The only regret is such a big feature arrived after launch, after early buyers finished the game perhaps already on console. The optimization is spot on though for those who will go on to enjoy it. It joins the ranks of Spider-Man Remastered, Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition, and Control Ultimate Edition as one of the better applications of ray trace reflection seen on console to date. It's still a shame we can't see the game run at a locked 60 FPS, on console anyway, but clearly Eidos Montreal's care and attention for the game goes beyond its launch window. So maybe, just maybe, there's more in store for the game in updates to come to solve the situation there. But that's all I have time for today. If you did enjoy this quick look at Guardians of the Galaxy on the latest patch, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, just use Twitter as always. But from me for now, thanks for watching.